What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Michael, and I hope you are having an awesome day. So we got some more Sabaton action. This time we got the Panzer Battalion, the Iraq War. So this has got to be an interesting one. A conflict that most of us watching this video grew up in, a little more familiar about, have a little more context about. So I'm excited to check this out. Once again, Panzer Battalion, Sabaton history. Be sure to drop a like. Check out the other Sabaton videos. It's in a playlist on my channel and it will show up at the end of the video. Let's get into it.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Pat from Sabaton.
And this is Sabaton History. When coalition forces led by the United States attacked Iraq in 2003, it was mainly armored cavalry that did the heavy lifting.
And Panzer Battalion became the first ever song in the Sabaton history about war history.
Gonna be interesting. Ooh.
September 11th, 2001 changed the way the United States perceived its role in the world.
Yep.
The end of the Cold War had brought an illusion of lasting peace and security over the West, an illusion that was shattered as civilian planes were turned into weapons. On September 20th, U.S. President George W. Bush addressed the American nation, emphasizing that the new war on terror would begin with those behind the attack, the terrorist groups of al-Qaeda, but it would not end until those who harbored terrorists and assisted or enabled them had been defeated all over the world. The Bush Doctrine transformed the national military strategy from limited peacekeeping missions to full-on war with boots on the ground on foreign soil. The war in Afghanistan that began in October ended in the complete defeat of the conventional Taliban militia in a short time. But this was just a first step, and also served as a training ground for preparation and mobilization, which the U.S. would need, for example, to defeat Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq. Since the Gulf War in the early 1990s, the U.S. military presence safeguarded Kuwait against Iraqi aggression. But by March 2003, it would be the jumping-off point for a full invasion. By the 20th, the ultimatum for Saddam Hussein and his sons to exit Iraq had expired. Operation Iraqi Freedom, with its rather lofty goal of establishing a democratic, peaceful, and prosperous Iraq free from the oppression of the Ba'athist regime, was to begin.
Oh, man. So stupid. You know, it's ironic. We watch these history we learn history in school. I'm watching Sabaton history. And the whole aspect of history is so you don't repeat your mistakes. Vietnam, Korea, 2 wars I can name. These are conflicts that are extremely hard to win. This whole thing is just, after a certain point, it just became stupid.
On the 20th, U.S. forces, supported by a coalition contingent from Australia, Great Britain, and Poland, advanced.
Oh, wow,
the ultimate
Polish.
objective was Baghdad. Surprise attacks by Tomahawk missiles to kill Saddam and his high command had failed in the nights before, but this was all just the beginning of a new age of warfare. The classic industrial age had been overturned by the new age of information-based warfare. Battlefields were observed through digital links, and units and missiles were guided by global positioning systems, GPS. This was all something new. First blood was drawn at the Talil Air Base and An Nasiriyah, close to the Euphrates River. Would the Iraqi forces sell themselves dearly with determined and disciplined resistance, or would they surrender and run in the face of overwhelming opposition? Well, Iraqi high command was very much aware that they would stand no chance straight up against American tanks in the open desert. Instead, they had planned for a wide defense in depth with dispersed strongpoints all over the Green Line, which ran straight through the country. The most effective Iraqi defenses were placed along the highways and in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, which the coalition forces would have to use to advance quickly. Most Iraqi soldiers stood by their colors initially, engaging the invaders with the weapons available to them. But there was only so much they could do with with ancient T-62 tanks against modern A-10 Warthogs and bunker-busting battle tanks. And with a minimal air force, they suffered terrible losses the night of shock and awe, March 22nd. The full might of the coalition air force descended on Iraq's command centers, air defense systems, and missile and artillery batteries. All throughout the country, explosions flared from the cruise missiles fired by the warships in the Persian Gulf. The immediate Iraqi response was to fire theater ballistic missiles and surface-to-surface missiles towards the invading force and into Kuwait. However, the air defense net of Patriot batteries from Kuwait to Saudi Arabia and Turkey was worth the money and blew 100% of those missiles straight out of the air before they could do any harm. The coalition was worried, though, about a chemical attack. You may remember one major reason why the U.S. had attacked Iraq was the belief that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction. And now, as the regime was on the verge of collapse, it would surely use them, right? The second wild card was the host of irregular forces. The Ba'ath Party militia, and especially the fanatical Saddam Fedayeen, Saddam's martyrs, may have been only poorly trained and mostly equipped with Kalashnikovs and rocket-propelled grenades, but their fanaticism was cause for concern. American soldiers soon began complaining that they could not separate the guerrilla fighters from the civilians since they wore no uniforms. The guerrillas had stashed munitions around the big cities, in schools and in mosques, hoping to draw the attackers into the teeth of a popular army. Others, like the Al-Qud militia, the youth organization Lions of Saddam, and non-Iraqi volunteers, would be equally dangerous in their fanaticism, if not in their military value. They wore no uniforms either, and they hid in hospitals and schools, communicating via low-power radios and simple cell phones. On March 23rd, Iraq's defense stiffened. The regular army was fortifying strongpoints all over the country while irregulars were gathering in the city streets, or they attacked the long lines of coalition supply columns. Task Force Tarawa lost 18 men trapped in an open engagement, while the 507th Maintenance Company ran into a hail of fire with 11 killed and 16 captured. Now, I have to say that the story of the Iraq War is still brought to us from a Western perspective. A full and cohesive Iraqi perspective is, to my knowledge, still lacking. But it is easy to say here that the Iraqi casualties were disproportionately higher during the invasion.
Well, I think that's a safe assumption to make. I mean, you know, just the sheer power, the military might. I mean, look at the budget that the U.S. has on military forces versus, you know, kind of, in a sense, very poorly equipped rebels. It's safe to say that there was casualties a lot more on the Iraqi side. But, you know, what he mentioned in this thing is exactly what happened in Vietnam and Korea, and it's so difficult. Is how do you decipher who's who? You know, as an American, you're wearing your American flag, you got your Kevlar, you got your body armor, all that jazz, you're wearing your uniform. How do you determine who's an enemy and who's not? It's a tough spot to be in.
The Americans used their combined arms doctrine to the fullest. It was a systematic approach to envelop cities and strongpoints from both sides, leaving it to airstrikes and attack helicopters to soften up the defenses before the armor engaged. Hunter-killer teams of Bradley and M1 tanks, outfitted with superior fire control and night and thermal vision, fired deadly combinations of sabot and heat shells into enemy armor. Hellfire missiles marked headquarters for F-15 pilots to take out, all while more mobile reconnaissance troops and Humvees continuously pushed on. Supported by informers within the city, often taxi drivers on mobile phones, special ops troops made surgical strikes against Ba'ath Party buildings. In the south, UK forces were isolating Basra, taking heavy fire from the irregular forces hiding inside the city. Kurdish Peshmerga forces were operating in the north, trying to draw Iraqi forces away, while special ops were securing key airfields, military facilities, and missile batteries. It became clear, though, that all along the Green Line, They were facing an army that was prepared to fight asymmetrically. Snipers and machine gunners lay in ambush. Mines and explosives were hidden along the roads. Rocket launchers were fired from civilian buildings. Mortar pits and heavy guns mounted on pickup trucks took the advancing columns under fire. Republican death squads forced civilians to fight at gunpoint, forcing them out into the streets where they met certain deaths. There were suicidal attacks with RPGs and trucks against tanks. Even the elite Republican Guard, the proud Nebuchadnezzar, Medea, and Al-Nida divisions, never truly stood a chance. From the 25th to the 29th, the move northward continued. Wow. The big cities were isolated until aggressive armored patrols, like the British demonstrated in Basra, could take them from the irregulars. Consuming 2 million gallons of fuel a day, the main bulk of the invasion force continued on towards Baghdad. Wow. All in all, a distance comparable to that from the Normandy beaches to the bridges on the Rhine.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I was literally about to say, look how fast they advanced. You know, like he mentioned with the Normandy thing, it was months and months and months. And this was a few days they did this.
They established a cordon around Baghdad and prepared for the assault. Again, American high command was unsure how this would play out. Would the civilians cooperate and cheer for the collapse of Saddam's regime? Or would their enemies fight to the last from house to house, intending to inflict as many casualties on the coalition as possible? What was Baghdad a trap or a hollow shell? There was only one way to find out.
You gotta do it. Craziness.
On April 7th, the Marine Corps prepared a Thunder Run. An armored unit, what other nations might call a Panzer Battalion, would rapidly advance into the city and find out firsthand how the Iraqis would react.
Ooh,
that day,
sketchy.
all while Mohammed Saeed al-Sahaf, aka Baghdad Bob, the Iraqi information minister, was claiming that no American infidels would ever set foot inside Baghdad, the Marine Corps was heading into downtown. Nearly unopposed, they drove through the streets, straight to the heart of Saddam Hussein's regime. But they did not turn back and get support. Instead, they chose to remain, and thus ended a siege before it even began. After a while, the Iraqi people came out of their houses and began, indeed, cheering for the coalition troops. They came so close that the Americans had to rely on interpreters on loudspeakers to get the crowd to calm down. At Al-Firdos Square, the people gathered around a huge statue of Saddam, tying a noose around its neck and pounding it with sledgehammers. An American recovery vehicle finally brought it down. Now, one American soldier put an American flag around the statue's head, but the Iraqis protested, and not wanting to look like an occupation force, the Americans agreed and were handed an Iraqi flag, one without the writing on it that Saddam had introduced. It was a symbol that his regime was at its end and that the people of Iraq were about to determine their own future. Wow. The fighting would continue for weeks in the north and even just a few blocks away in Baghdad, as Marines there were already engaged in a tenacious firefight. The counterinsurgency would soon become worse, and the post-invasion tale of Iraq is anything but a fairy tale of nation building. But that was the future. For the song Panzer Battalion came out on Sabaton's Primo Victoria album, recorded in 2004 and released in 2005. And for this moment, the Iraq War seemed to be over and won. On May 1st, 2003, President Bush declared on the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, mission accomplished.
Ooh-wee. All right. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up right there because they just interviewed the band. I'm going to go ahead and check out the song. I wanted to get the historical context behind it. That's cool to think, or it's cool, but it's also important to know when the song was released. It was a cutoff of 2004, like he mentioned. Obviously, a lot transpired in the next couple of years after that, which would probably change the wording of some of what they're saying in the song. But anyways, Panzer Battalion, Sabaton history. I hope you guys liked it. Go ahead and check out Panzer Battalion. It's going to be up when this is released. Go check out the playlist of Sabaton. Go check out other videos on my channel. Give me recommendations. Give me feedback. Trying my best to get all the content that you guys are wanting to see, reacted to, and I'm enjoying all of it. So anyway, stay healthy, stay happy, and have a blessed day. Peace.